I always like to joke before I came here to work at Temple Israel that Memphis followed me wherever I went along my journey to the rabbinate. And so before I have the opportunity to introduce our darshan and our teacher and our preacher for this evening, I wanted to make special note that among the storied and blessed legacy of this congregation over the years, one of the many blessings it has brought into the world is lots of rabbis. For me, it actually started during my interview for Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati when I met one Jeff Dreyfus for the first time. And then continued with me as I went to Cincinnati to study, had the opportunity to get to know Rabbi Karen Krieger-Bogard, as well as Rabbi Michael Danziger, who now serves as a senior rabbi at my home congregation in Nashville. And Rabbi Bogard, who is in St. Louis with another child of this congregation, who is one of our beloved colleagues, Rabbi Rachel Bierman. And to those names, I add those of my previous senior rabbi, Denise Egger, who I had the privilege to work with in Los Angeles, as well as Rabbi Barry Cohen, Rabbi David Fetter. I am sure that I am missing some names here, but I'll leave it to all of you to correct me once the service is concluded. And so with that, we have the continuation of this legacy, of this really storied and beautiful legacy of this congregation, bringing more rabbis, more teachers, more clay kodesh vessels of holiness into the world. Josh is one of two rabbinic students currently at HUC from this congregation, and along with Matthew Filderman, who's currently in his year in Israel and Jerusalem. And so it is my great honor and privilege to invite forward third-year rabbinic student coming to us from the Los Angeles campus of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, our teacher, Josh Less.
Hello. What an intro. Thank you so much, Rabbi Levy, Rabbi Ross. And I want to just say thanks to all of you for being here tonight, and thanks to Rabbis Dreyfus and Rabbi Greenstein. All of you have been incredible mentors for me, and it's really exciting to get to practice giving a sermon. I know my professors would be happy, and they're going to be happy when I tell them about this. And thank you to all of you for being here. It's such an honor to be here at my spiritual home. So I want to start tonight with a question. And the question is, what do Walt Disney, Michael Jordan, and John Grisham all have in common? No, this is not a trick question. And no, the answer is not that they're all rich and famous. No, my friends, the answer is that all three of these figures experienced a very significant failure at an early point in their lives. Michael Jordan was cut from his high school basketball team at the age of 16. John Grisham's first book was rejected 27 times before being published. And Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper because the editor said he, quote, lacked sufficient imagination. Can you imagine having been the one to tell Michael Jordan that his jump shot wasn't good enough, to tell John Grisham his stories weren't captivating enough, or to tell Walt Disney that he lacked sufficient imagination? But what happened next is perhaps what's most important. Of course, we know how these stories turned out. Michael Jordan, instead of calling it quits, he worked harder and harder until he eventually made that same high school basketball team, going on to play basketball at the University of North Carolina, and then, of course, for the Chicago Bulls, winning 6 rings, and is arguably the best player of all time, but we can debate that after. Shul. John Grisham did not quit after his first book. Once it finally was published, it was actually a complete failure. But instead of giving up on writing books, Grisham continued to write, and his second book, The Firm, achieved great success. It went on to spend 47 consecutive weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. Now, of course, as a proud Memphian, I'm inclined to say that Grisham's book was a success because it took place right here in our hometown of Memphis. But what is remarkable is that Grisham didn't quit. And since he's authored over 30 books and sold over 300 million copies. And then there's Walt Disney. After being fired, Disney branched out on his own and moved across the country to Hollywood, embarking on a journey that would culminate in one of the most famous entertainment companies in the world. Can you imagine if Disney listened to that newspaper editor and didn't continue to dream and use that imagination that he was told that he lacked? My friends, the question that I began with actually has a second part to its answer. It's not only that these three experienced a significant failure at an early stage, but more importantly, they did not let the fear of failure undermine their hopes and dreams. They did not allow the potential for failure in the future stop them from pursuing their passions in the present. They worked harder, they dreamed bigger, and eventually found ways to achieve their goals despite those setbacks. They modeled what human beings are capable of when they don't allow past failures or the thought of failure in the future impede their growth. As Rabbi Ross said earlier, we just celebrated the holiday of Simchat Torah, in which we rejoice in the gift of Torah and begin the annual Torah reading cycle anew. This annual rereading begins this Shabbat with the book of Genesis. This time of the year in the Jewish calendar is extremely precious. We have made it through the journey of the High Holy Days, when we are engaged in the difficult work of Cheshbon HaNefesh, when we're asked to take stock of our lives, to think about how we want and need to change, and to committing to a better path forward. Eventually, though, the High Holy Days come to an end, and we go back to the regular rhythm of our lives. We are now on the other side, and we are faced with another year in which we are engaged with the task of living. During the High Holy Days or after, we may even have set goals, considered new aspirations, and decided how we will achieve them. And yet, many of these goals will most likely go unrealized. But why? Well, there are, without a doubt, plenty of reasons why we will not meet our goals. Life gets in the way, we get busy, we have other commitments that we did not foresee. There are always complications on our path, and many of them we have no control over. But what about the things we do have control over? How can we navigate those better in this coming year? Well, one thing we can work at having control over is our own fear of failure. Fear is one of our strongest emotions, and one that all of us experience. And the fear of failure is also a universal feeling. In fact, researchers have found that 33% of Americans suffer from this fear in their workplace, and up to 50% of Americans say that the fear of failure prevents them from achieving their goals or revisiting them at some point in the future. While these statistics paint a picture, what they neglect is that the fear of failure is something we all experience. No matter who we are, how much we've accomplished, at one point or another in our lives, we will be overcome with the prospect of failure. The shared human experience of fearing failure can actually be a source of comfort. To know that everyone at some point experiences this fear reminds us of our own humanity. But the kicker is what we do with the fear. Do we let it paralyze us into stagnation, or do we wrestle with it and pursue our goals in spite of being scared? Now, most often when I think of bravery, I imagine people who are not scared of anything. But perhaps the key to being brave is the opposite. Perhaps the key to bravery is to keep on keeping on, even though we are scared, even though we have fears of embarrassment, of the unknown, of not doing something perfectly, or of course, of failing. Perhaps when thinking about bravery, it would be wise to heed Nelson Mandela's understanding of it. He writes, "I learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it." The brave person is not one who does not feel afraid, but the person who conquers that fear. End quote. The fact that a fear of failure is a shared human experience comforts us by showing us that we are in good company when experiencing this fear. And if that company wasn't good enough, what if I told you that maybe even God too experiences this feeling? In this week's Parsha, we read the story of creation. creation of the universe, of plants, of animals, of birds, and of course, of humanity. In English, the verses, which in fact open up the entire Torah, read, "When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God hovering over the water, God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." And right at the beginning, just before God began the process of creation, we learn that God was, quote, hovering over the water. The Hebrew reads, "V'ruach Elohim mirachefet al panei hamayim." That verb, mirachefet, is often translated as hovering. But as so often with the Hebrew language, the verb root has multiple meanings. Another meaning of this verb is to slow down, to relax, or to tremble. So with this understanding of the verb, that same verse would then read again, "When God began to create heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep, and a wind from God slowing down, relaxing, or trembling over the water. And then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." So just before God said, "Let there be light," the phrase that signifies God's creative action in the world, God experienced a slowing down, a trembling, perhaps even a hesitation. Was God fearful of what would come with creating the world? Was God scared of the unknown, of what would happen after God said, "Let there be light"? Of course, we will never know, and we can never know. But what we do know, my friends, is that even though God may have experienced this trembling before deciding to create the world, perhaps even taking a really deep breath and saying, "Here we go," God went on and created the world anyways. God said, "Let there be light," despite that initial slowing down, despite that initial trembling or hesitation. Now, later on in our parsha, way after the stories of Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, in fact, 10 generations down the line, we learn that God became upset with humanity and the way that humanity was living because they were only concerned with themselves and with doing evil. The Torah reports that God was saddened by humanity's behavior and even regretted having created them. This sadness and regret felt by God did not lead God to give up on humanity, on all of us. Rather, it propelled God to consider a different plan and to chart a different course. Instead of calling it quits forever on humanity, God decided to start over by bringing a flood and from there creating a covenant with a man named Noah. You all remember Noah, right? Now, you may have an issue with sending a flood to the world in order to solve your problems. You'll have to take that up with God. But I do want to urge us to consider God's insistence on achieving the goal of humanity living a moral life instead of simply giving up on that goal when it was experiencing failure. Perhaps this was the reason God trembled in the first place. Despite God's seemingly well-founded fears, however, God persevered and found new ways to achieve God's goals. In the coming year, we all have goals that we hope to achieve. We all have hopes and dreams that until this point in our lives have gone unfulfilled. What are the things that you want to do differently in the coming year? What do you want to accomplish? How do you want to change? And how is the fear of failure getting in your way? Maybe this year will finally be the year that we take the step and start our own business or change careers into the thing that we're passionate about. Maybe we finally want to get around to learning that foreign language we've always said we would learn or establish a better exercise routine. Maybe we want to travel to that place we've always dreamed of going to or fix a relationship that has deteriorated. Whatever our goals happen to be, may we all be blessed with the resolve to stare down our fear of failure. May we remember that it is completely normal and human to have this fear, but what's important is what we do with it. In the coming year, let us recall the inspirational stories of Walt Disney, Michael Jordan, and John Grisham when experiencing our own inevitable setbacks. And in the coming year, let us be reminded to do the holy work of imitating God, not only through acts of kindness, but also imitating God by pushing forward despite our fears of failure, and by charting new paths if and when we do experience failure. Ken Yehi Ratzon, Shabbat Shalom.